In search of the killer app for social robots, why you should be careful installing Fortnite, how to use a bag of words to uncover secrets of the Beatles, and why you should turn off your router and never turn it back on. All that and more coming up on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 45, recorded Thursday, August 16th, 2018.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by CashFly. Make this the last month your CDN bill gives you a headache. Join the thousands of others who trust CashFly's reliable network for a complimentary, detailed analysis of your current CDN bill and usage trends. Visit twit.cashfly.com.
And by Slide Belts, high-quality, comfortable ratchet belts that are easy to adjust. If you want a better belt, go to slidebelts.com/twit and use code TWIT for 20% off.
Welcome to Tech News Weekly. This is a show where we talk to and about the tech news, the makers and breakers of the tech news. I am Megan Maroney.
I'm Jason Howell. We talk to and about robots. I don't know if we ever talk to robots, but I guess we don't know.
I know we don't. I mean, a lot of these people, we just call them up by Skype. They could be, I don't know.
It's true. Very true.
So a few weeks ago, we mourned the end of the Kuri home robot and wondered when our lives would finally be enhanced by our own Rosie the robot made like the Jetsons. Joining us to talk about the struggle to create the killer app for personal robots and why maybe using the word killer and the word robot in the same sentence might not be the best marketing. We're joined by Evan Ackerman, senior robot writer from IEEE Spectrum. Welcome back to the show, robot writer Evan.
Hi, folks.
Are you a robot? First questions.
I can't tell you whether or not I am.
If a robot would say that. So
Exactly.
So first, let's talk about the Boston Dynamics announcement that they're going to be creating a whole bunch of new spot minis. That's what the company calls nimble robots that handle objects, climb stairs, and will operate in offices, homes, and outdoors. What did you make of this announcement?
It's all very optimistic. Boston Dynamics, of course, makes probably the most amazing robots on the planet right now, especially for like robots that can run and walk and kind of go upstairs and handle all different kinds of terrain and do acrobatics. Like it's crazy what these things can do. And they've been working for a long time on building them, and it's only been recently that they've been trying to figure out, okay, we've got these things, how can we actually like make a product? How can we sell them? How can we make some money? And in the past, they've been doing what everybody who makes like a few super expensive robots does, which is trying to sell them to the military. And that hasn't gone so well. So now they're kind of exploring other product options, and they've promised to build a whole bunch of these things, but it's not totally clear exactly what they're going to be good for.
So who would buy these? I mean, are they for homes, offices? Like, are they just for super rich people or small companies?
They'll bring you a drink.
Yeah.
All this development time and effort, and it's all to bring you a cocktail, right?
Well, I'd totally buy one, but I probably won't be able to afford it. And like that's part of the problem is these are very capable robots, but they're also at least initially going to be really expensive. And Boston Dynamics has suggested like a couple different kinds of things that they might be able to do. One of them that everybody got really excited about was package delivery. And it's like, that you can put an arm on these and they can walk up steps and deliver a package. But there's two problems. Like Boston Dynamics has said that they can probably deliver packages to like 80% of houses, but it's that last 20% of the really hard houses with like weird stairways and gardens and stuff that's going to be really tricky. And the other problem, and this is just a problem with robotics in general, is that right now humans are really good at delivering packages and humans are really cheap, and these robots are expensive.
Yeah, that's kind of the struggle that I have with kind of the current phase of robotics, which is that like when I was younger and I had these future ideas or visions of what the future would be and how robotics would play into that, I had these grand visions, and to look at where we've come, and Boston Dynamics is a prime example. Their research and their R&D and everything that they have put on YouTube over the years is incredible. Like when you watch it, but yet at the same time, these home robots, these robots that we assume we're going to bring into our home and be functional and do all these things we don't want to do, and it's going to be super useful, just continue to be a really big letdown. I don't know how Boston Dynamics overcomes that, but I guess of all the companies out there making robots right now, Boston Dynamics has proven that it's capable of doing something very special.
Yeah, I mean, eventually these things will get cheaper. They'll get more capable than they are now. I think in the near term, the most likely thing is that we'll see these in very specialized roles where their cost isn't so much of an obstacle, like things like disaster relief, firefighting, where you can afford to put a robot in there that's expensive because it has the potential to save lives, and that's okay.
Right.
So we've heard a lot about caregiving robots. I mean, most famously, or the first time I heard about this was from John Markoff's book, Machines of Loving Grace, like that, in our old age, we'll all be watched over by robots. How practical, I mean, is that coming soon? By the time, we're 95, 100, 110, will there be, will we all be watched over by caregiving robots?
I really hope so. That's a couple decades away from me. I think that in the near term, it's good to be skeptical of anything that has to do with manipulation. And that's something that Boston Dynamics mentioned really briefly, that they're kind of working towards, like having a robot that can pick things up for you. But that's a really, really hard problem. I think, like in this video you're seeing, this is not something that this robot would ever be able to do in your house. At least it's going to be a long time. Sorry to, get your expectations up. But I think realistically, having smaller single-purpose robots in our home that can kind of help us like communicate and remind us to take medication and keep us connected, that's definitely going to happen. And then we'll build up from there to get to the point where we have legged robots slipping in our banana peels.
I can't even get my kids to put their dishes in the dishwasher, so I don't know about a robot.
Have you tried a robot, though?
No. Well, my favorite robot that's currently in my house is my Neato vacuum. I have one of the standard way, not the newest one that does a lot of fancy stuff. It still maps, but I think it doesn't have the same sort of mapping. I have the D5, but I know that they've upgraded since then. What are the new updates to the newest Neato, and why are they important?
Yeah, so Neato just updated their D7, which is the top-of-the-line robot vacuum, and it's pretty much the same as the D5. It has a laser inside of it that spins around really fast and locates all the obstacles in your house, so it makes a map. And the D7 update, the big thing is that the robot now remembers that map. So the earlier versions, like including the D5, it makes a map every time. It makes a new map every time, and that helps it clean better. But now that the robot can remember its maps with this new update for the D7, it means that you get this floor layout that it remembers. You can tell it where not to go just by drawing lines across this map that it gives you. And that's just the first feature that Neato has announced. But this is going to be a big deal because being able to remember like the layout of your house means that eventually the robot will get to know where all your rooms are, like where your furniture is, where you spend time, and it'll make it better at cleaning. And also, it has the potential to integrate with all kinds of other smart home technology to make your house smarter overall.
Kind of interesting that this hasn't existed before. This seems like one of those robotic vacuums as they've evolved. You would think that the whole mapping aspect of it would be very important, but it turns out that actually tacks on a pretty large premium. Would you say, based on what you've seen, based on your experience, that extra premium is actually worth it, or is the kind of like end result kind of a marginal improvement over a robot that doesn't have this advanced mapping capability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've always said in the past, like, look, the top of the line Roombas and Neatos are great vacuums, but kind of their mid-range, they don't clean any better than the less expensive ones. So if you're looking at flagship features like mapping, you pay a premium, like it's a couple $100s at least. And so far it hasn't really been worth it, but this update from Neato is starting to suggest that, maybe in the next 6 months to a year, as Neato releases more new features based on these persistent maps, then yeah, maybe you might be able to start justifying paying more for a vacuum that can, for example, like you can say, go clean the dining room, and it'll clean the dining room. Or it'll be smart enough to figure out exactly where in your house gets dirty, and it'll just clean those areas more frequently.
So right now with mine, they send you these little strips of it's like a ribbon kind of, but it's made of some material, like magnetic material, and you have to I have to lay it down on the top of the stairs so that the Nito doesn't go over them. But ideally with one of these, if I pay another $300, then I wouldn't have to do that. I could just tell it, don't go down the stairs.
It shouldn't throw itself down your stairs, but mine has thrown itself down my stairs too, so it just happens.
Maybe he was making a statement. It's like, I vacuumed the floors one too many times. I'm done.
Yeah. Well, I want it to climb up the stairs. Like, that's what I feel like. That's what those Boston Dynamics legs could be handy with the Nito.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have the first two versions of the Anki Cosmo, that little friendly-looking robot. They're really fun, but I don't think they are ready to care for me in my old age yet. But there's a new one, the new Anki, the Vector. What's new about the Vector?
So it's a much fancier version of the ones that you have. It's got more processing power. It's got more sensors. It's completely independent, so it doesn't require a cell phone anymore. And it's a lot smarter, and it's got more skills. It's definitely not going to take care of you. It might be your friend a little bit. Anki is kind of saying, this is a little robot that you can kind of keep on your table, and like you can talk to it, and it has all these little curious behaviors, and it'll be fun to like play around with. And the earlier ones have sold really, really well. It's not very expensive. I think it's a couple $100 on Kickstarter right now, which means that it's totally worth trying if it interests you. I think the thing to worry about, though, is like Anki and other companies building these social robots have this tendency to say, oh, yeah, these will be your friend, like they'll become part of your family. And I always raise an eyebrow at that, because that's an impossibly high bar for any robot, especially a little tiny one, to hit. So I think as long as you maintain reasonable expectations for what these little guys can do, they'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the Anki, these are neat, but they kind of epitomize my feelings on some the current state of home robotics, which is they even point this out in the article that you posted at IEEE, is that they say this is not a toy. And I'm sorry, come on. It is a toy. It is a robot toy. Don't overpromise. You're not going to be able to deliver on any promise that says this is anything other than a toy. It might do things that aren't just cute little interactions, but at the end of the day, it's not doing your dishes or serving some greater, higher purpose in your life. It's still very much an entertainment value sort of product.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Anki, that's okay, because it's a couple $100.
Sure.
Even if your expectations are kind of high, you're not going to be too disappointed.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an example of how social robots in general, the ones that you can buy that are $700, $800, they have a much bigger problem because people expect a lot from them, and the companies have been promising a lot, and they've had a little bit of trouble delivering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to those bigger. The Kuri went out of business, but then you write about the Haru, which is not the same sort of thing. It's by Honda. So what is the biggest problem with these social robots? Is it cost, or is there some other? You mentioned, or another article mentioned on IEEE about that they don't have a killer app.
Yeah, that's really a big problem for social robots right now, is that everybody's kind of looking for the one thing that they can do that will justify people spending between $500 and $1,000 on them. And the original social robot was Jibo, and they had this great idea of a robot that'll talk to you and communicate information and be really helpful. And then kind of Amazon came along with Alexa and Echo, and then that was way cheaper and nobody really needed the robot part. So it's tricky out there, and a lot of companies are still looking for this, and I don't think that anybody's found it yet. And Honda specifically, or Honda Research, has been just looking at how do we make a robot that can convey emotion without building the expectations up so high that it can't achieve what you feel like it should achieve. And they've done this by making a robot that doesn't really look like it does much. It just has these two eyeballs and a little body, but they've been able to make it do all of these amazing emotional behaviors, and they're hoping that they can learn from this and figure out, okay, how can we get robots to actually make more of a connection with people?
Yeah, that is cute. So eyes and a smile, but maybe not so much the legs or the Rosie, the robot-made dress.
Yeah,
That's
it's just sitting on your table staring at you, giving you those doughy eyes. Yeah,
they're still working on the whole lower half with like the arms and the legs. You know, eventually they'll get there.
Right. Well, Evan, thank you so much for joining us. Evan Ackerman is a senior writer for IEEE Spectrum's blog, their award-winning robotics blog, Automaton, which you can find at spectrum.ieee.org. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks.
Thank you, Evan.
Take care.
Take care. All right, so Fortnite. When Fortnite for Android was finally announced last week, it kind of confirmed what we thought we knew about its distribution, that Epic Games would bypass the Google Play Store and instead offer up its insanely popular game through its own means on its own site. And in order to do so, it requires would-be players to lessen the security on their Android device. It also requires gamers to employ a level of scrutiny that they might not fully understand or even be completely aware of in order to avoid their phones becoming compromised by imposter apps with ill intentions. And joining us to talk about how these imposter apps can prey on those who don't actually know any better is Christoph Hebeisen, security researcher from Lookout. Really excited to have you on the show, Christoph. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. So when you first caught wind of Epic Games' decision to bypass the Play Store, we kind of were hearing some rumors about this before it was public knowledge. What were your thoughts initially?
So I think the best description of my thoughts would be a big sigh. For years, we have told Android users that sticking to the Play Store is the way to go and is the best way to really stay safe in the Android ecosystem. And along comes this very, very popular game. And for that, the only way to get it is to download it from a third-party site. And suddenly this makes this behavior, which was essentially limited to downloading cheats or maybe bootlegged paid apps, a normal thing. And that really exposes users to so much more risk.
And I mean, mind you, there are other examples of this happening, and with somewhat popular things like Amazon, for example. Amazon's apps, by and large, its app store essentially was really only available through their site. You couldn't get to it through the Play Store, and you had to actually do the same unknown sources check off in Android in order to install it. But I mean, outside of that, this game is gigantic. Obviously, it's a behemoth, especially with children right now. So they might not be of a level of understanding, or heck, maybe they understand more than we probably give them credit for, to be honest. But has there ever been? I mean, based on what we've seen in these examples prior, like Amazon, does that give you any hope at all that maybe people will avoid this, or are you seeing differently now? Are we seeing a lot of apps that are taking advantage of this right now?
No, this is really fairly unique. We haven't seen this at this scale before, and to my knowledge, this is the first example where it's really so huge, like where it's at this order of magnitude.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure most people listening to this understand, but basically, the reason they're doing this is to avoid the 30% that Google will take off the top, which is understandable. I mean, it's so much money, and the reason that it is available in the iOS store is that Apple doesn't allow you to do that, and so it's kind of a tricky thing. Like in some sense, the users are made to kind of sideload and do this tricky thing, and they're not getting any benefit. They're not, it's free anyway, but they're not getting any benefit from this. So, I mean, who's at fault here? Because, I mean, is Epic Games at fault, or is Google at fault? Because, I mean, it's great that Google has this open system. What's the solution?
Well, I don't want to wade into the economics of this at all. That's not my field of expertise. But ultimately, I think really having a secured ecosystem in which there is a well-vetted source, such as the Play Store, is ultimately the best way to go about things. And I don't want to assign fault to either side. But I think the two parties ultimately have to find an agreement to keep the users in the ecosystem safe, because that's in everybody's interest.
Now, talk a little bit about the imposters that we're finding. I know prior to Fortnite even being released in an official way, there were, wannabe fake apps appearing on the Play Store even a couple of months prior. Obviously, when you're talking about the numbers of Android users, just the sheer number of total Android users, there's even a tiny percentage of that large number is going to be a lot of people that end up finding something on the Play Store and going, oh, hey, look, Fortnite's here. I'm going to download it. What do they end up with? Like, what are you seeing in your research that, ends up being packaged in these imposter apps?
So we have seen a number of different apps that fall into different malware categories. So the Wired article spoke in particular about some that were found at a number of links. Those apps were adware that essentially showed a video that looked like a game loading screen, and after that, some ads were displayed. And at least in one of them, it was implied to the user that they needed to click on the ads for some kind of verification. Obviously, that's the monetization mechanism for the malware author, is the clicks on those ads. So the user would have known fairly quickly, after making some money for the malware author, that they'd been duped. We have also seen some other apps using the Fortnite name. We are not sure what their distribution mechanism is exactly, but some of those fell into other categories. There were some crypto miners, there was some chargeware that sent premium SMS messages, and we even saw a surveillanceware app that used the Fortnite name.
So right now you can't get Android. There's a wait. I mean, you can't get Fortnite on Android. There's a waiting list. If you're supposed to, Epic Games says if you want it on Android, you go to epic.com/Android, and if you go there now, it says sign up for a waiting list. And I presume that they would give you instructions on how to do this. I'm sort of still looking for fault, looking for someone to blame here. And I'm not going to ask you who's to blame because you already didn't answer that. But I mean, isn't it our responsibility in some sense to know how, if we're going to turn off those security settings, then to turn them back on afterwards?
That is certainly the best way, the best thing to do. If you absolutely must install Fortnite, then sure, switch those security settings off. Make sure it is coming from exactly the official site and that it's typed correctly and you didn't follow a sketchy link, and then re-enable the security setting afterwards that doesn't allow installation from third-party sources. Now, of course, a tech-savvy user would do that, and somebody who is conscious of security. My concern is more with the large majority of users to who that switch probably doesn't have any obvious meaning.
And of course, your other concern, which is a good one, is that if this works for Epic Games, such a big app, then this will become more commonplace. And so there won't be people telling stories like this, because more and more apps will say, well, if I can avoid that 30% surcharge, I will.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's possible that this becomes normalized, and that would really put us into a kind of different period for Android malware, in which it becomes much easier for malware authors to distribute their wares to unsuspecting users, because it just becomes so normal, and there is no alert popping up on the phone anymore because everybody has disabled that setting permanently.
Yeah, and that's kind of the trick there too. Like, I've been thinking about this and trying to figure out, like, okay, well, obviously there's a little bit of education. There's education that has to happen on the OS side, which I think Google does that when you go in there with the unknown sources and you check that. It gives you a little warning and it says, kind of this lowers the security on your phone. The question is whether people actually remember to go in there after the install process is over and undo what they did. And I think probably a lot of people don't do that. Maybe Google could then, have something appear every once in a while, or at a, not hit you over the head with it, because that would actually offend a lot of people as well if they were over bugged about it. But some sort of later check-in to be like, hey, do you remember 24 hours ago you unchecked this to do something and it's still unchecked, you're still insecure, do you want to reactivate? Maybe they can build something like that in. Is Google doing anything else on an OS level that's helping to protect against these sorts of things, to your knowledge?
Well, I know that Google is doing a tremendous job at protecting the Play Store from malware. There's a lot of analysis going on, and there are the apps in the Play Store really are by and large very safe. On the OS level, well, I mean, there are certain warnings in place, but other than that, the users are on their own. Android is an open system that allows you to do with your device what you want. And if you want to be insecure, you can.
Some people do choose that, yeah.
So the app is free. Fortnite is free. So what happens is they're not taking your credit card for it. But then the in-app purchases, that's why Google really, I mean, that's why Epic Games really wants this out of the Google Play Store. So have you seen anything happen on that end with people's credit cards being taken or anything like that, or is it too early to see that?
So far, I mean, I listed some classes of malware earlier. Really, the one thing that we saw that would cost people money was essentially chargeware, and the other monetization mechanisms for the malware authors seem to be either ad clicks or the crypto miners that we saw as well.
Yeah, and Google's cracked down on the whole crypto mining apps as well within the Play Store. They kind of ejected those, as did the iOS or the Apple App Store. Kind of got rid of those, so you can't even have those in apps and have them distributed through the Play Store. In theory, you cannot, and I think their systems are kind of cracking down on that. So, best practices, for anybody who is watching. I think a lot of people that actually follow this network and our shows here probably understand this, but what would you recommend to the average person? If they're like, oh, I don't really quite understand this whole Fortnite on Android thing, what's the big deal? What would you say is a good best practice for people in that position?
Well, I have a short list of recommendations to be really as safe as possible and on Android, and that is really quite good. First one, stick to Google Play. Second one, I would say install an AV app such as Lookout. Third one, stick to Google Play. And then if you absolutely must install Fortnite, make sure you re-enable that switch and make sure that you go back to safety after installing that one thing from hopefully the right place. And did I mention stick to Google Play?
I think you did. But I mean, that really is the big trick here, and that's kind of that's why this is so complicated, because there is no ability to get this insanely popular game and stick to Google Play at the same time. They are distinctly different things entirely.
But you can get it on different platforms, and I'm not telling everyone to go out and buy an iPhone, but like on different game consoles.
There are different ways to get it on there. Yeah, but that's not going to stop the kid who just has an Android device and they want to play it because all their friends are playing it. I mean, they're going to get it through whatever means they have to. So sticking to Google Play is not an option there, but understanding how your phone works, that really is part of everyone's responsibility as well. So hopefully, if anything, this kind of teaches people that. Christoph, thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, you mentioned Lookout security software. Where do you want people to kind of find out more about your product?
Sorry?
Where would you like people to kind of find out more about Lookout?
Yes, please go to lookout.com. You can see that at the bottom of your screen, so you can find out. And also, you can find us on Google Play and also on the Apple App Store as well.
Could I sideload Lookout if I wanted to?
If you absolutely want to, absolutely you can.
Thanks.
This is Android. You can do whatever you want, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. We'll talk to you soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Take care.
After the break, what makes a John song and what makes a Paul song? We're going to ask the algorithm. Actually, we're going to ask a Harvard statistician. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by CashFly. Do you remember the last time you were woken at 3 a.m. with a frantic phone call because your CDN experienced another outage and you dreaded opening your email and finding hundreds of complaints from all of your users? With unreliable tech support, every second your site is down is money being lost on your watch. Being the one to answer the tough questions about your CDN coverage is no picnic, especially when you can't even predict your own CDN costs because of unpredictable usage-based bills. Make the switch. CashFly has been building trusted CDN relationships since 2002. CashFly eliminates CDN outages, helps customers reach new markets, and controls costs for all of their customers. They guarantee 100% availability with their bulletproof 100% SLA. Supported by an expert team of smart, easy to talk to, and agile techs who can answer all your questions, and they will answer them the first time. They will not pass you around to 5 different departments. Now, if you're in software or if you're in podcasting like we are, or any other business that relies on having your content readily available to your consumers, it is hard to predict bandwidth consumption for the month. Even worse, it's frustrating when companies try to lock you into a contract that isn't flexible and is not built around your unique demand and traffic patterns. Make this the last month your CDN bill gives you a headache. Say goodbye to logging in multiple times a week, or worse, even daily, trying to track your CDN usage. On average, customers who switch to CashFly save more than 20%. Just imagine what you could do with that 20% and your time when you don't have to micromanage your usage or worry about having to commit to a long contract based on a growth plan that you didn't even write. That is a crazy way to buy CDN. Don't do it that way. You already know CashFly because we've been using them for so long. They're literally synonymous with the beginnings of all of our shows. That's because we have been hosting all of our podcasts, audio and video, on CashFly for nearly a decade. Every month, you, our viewers and listeners, download petabytes of data fast and flawlessly. Twit would not exist without CashFly. Join the thousands of others who trust CashFly's reliable network and let CashFly give you some sanity back. I have an exclusive offer just for Twit listeners. CashFly is giving away a completely complimentary, detailed analysis of your current CDN bill and your usage trends. See if you might be leaving 20% or more on the table. Learn more at twit.cashfly.com. That's twit.cashfly.com, and we thank CashFly for their support.
So arguably, no rock band in existence is more meticulously tracked and obsessed over than the Beatles. Personally, I'm a huge fan. My favorite album has always been the 1966 classic Rubber Soul. As a lifelong Beatles fan, I've often found myself caught up in tracking the mythology, just like every other crazy Beatles fan out there. The legacy, the many unanswered questions that help kind of elevate the Beatles to the legendary status that they are in music history. One of the many unanswered questions has been the true authorship of the music in the classic track In My Life. That's the 23rd on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest songs of all time, and it's also found on the Rubber Soul album. A few folks finally did the rest of us lazy fans a solid by applying mathematical and statistical analysis to the Beatles catalog in order to figure it out once and for all. Who wrote the music to that track? And we're welcoming to the show Mark Glickman, PhD, senior lecturer on statistics at Harvard University. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on your show.
You bet. It's great to get you here. And I assume you've been very, very busy because the story is awesome. And I know you've been making the rounds. So we really appreciate you coming on to talk to us today. So first of all, you, Dr. Jason Brown, Ryan Song, the three of you, you must be true hardcore Beatles fans if you're willing to embark on this journey. Was this born out of a love of music, or was this kind of pursuit of just a really good challenge?
I would end up saying that it was a combination of both, I suppose. I met Jason at a conference a couple years ago where I was presenting some work that I do in statistics and sports, and somehow we got around to talking after my talk, and you know, we pretty quickly converged on both of our interest in music, in particular the Beatles. And Jason was telling me about some work that he had done on figuring out the first chord of A Hard Day's Night using some mathematical ideas, essentially using Fourier analysis to decompose the actual frequencies into their constituent waveforms. And he was able to back out what the actual arrangement was for that chord. So he was telling me how, I was also kind of thinking about like ways of characterizing, all the different songs in a particular way using graph theory. And so I was thinking, actually that's an interesting issue, trying to get a sense for, who wrote what based on some, musical features of the songs that could be analyzed in a quantitative way. And that's basically what the origin was for the work that we did. Ryan is a student of mine, and I got connected to him because, he's also a hardcore Beatles fan, and he wanted to do like an independent study with me at Harvard. And this was the perfect project, so he ended up helping us kind of develop this work.
And was this purely about In My Life as the example, or was this really about just analyzing Beatles songs, understanding the kind of the mathematics that make up the song kind of approach of each author, and then somewhere along the way you realize, hey, here's a riddle that we can finally figure out based on these systems that we've created?
It was definitely motivated by In My Life. This is something that Jason has been thinking about for a long time. But I think we decided that there was a broader question, which is how do you characterize a songwriter's fingerprint in a quantitative way? And so it actually had a broader scope than just simply trying to figure out quantitatively who is likely to have written the music for In My Life.
So most people will say that John's music was more reflective, whereas Paul's was more like about love, but you're not talking about the lyrics at all. This is purely just the music, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we're focused only on the music. I mean, I have a colleague of mine who was commenting to me, kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way. It's like, if you really want to figure out who wrote the song and you're trying to do it in a probabilistic way, why don't you just simply use the person who sang it? And that'll get you like 90% of the way there. And that's true. But that doesn't really extend very well if the goal is really to be able to characterize musical style based on musical content.
Well, and not to mention, I mean, the reason that this is kind of a confusing question to begin with is that, throughout the history of the Beatles lore, both back in the day and then, over the years, there are many clues, there are many, ways in which, any number of the bandmates had said that this person was responsible for this person was responsible for this. But in the case of In My Life, there was conflicting opinions by both Paul McCartney and John Lennon, in the sense that both of them at some point or another said that they were pretty much responsible for the music. So it was an open question of like, all right, who's misremembering here? And, enter statistics and math to actually kind of analyze their writing styles in a holistic sense up to Rubber Soul, and then figure out from there, okay, this actually matches these patterns. So how similar would you say from a mathematical sense were those writing styles? How specific were you able to get based on the system you set up here?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there are certainly some features that, were not too surprising that came out of our approach, but then there were some that we didn't entirely expect. So for example, one of the things that sort of popped out of the model is that that John Lennon tended to use melodies that generally stayed on the diatonic scale. And so I'm going to embarrass myself by doing a little bit of singing. The diatonic scale, like say if you're singing in the key of C, so it would be C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Those 8 notes, really 7 because I repeated the last one an octave up, are the notes on a diatonic scale. When you start moving away from those notes, like if you were at a piano and you just played all white notes, those notes are the notes of a diatonic scale for the key of C. Once you start going to the black notes, those are not in the diatonic scale. So Paul McCartney tended to use those notes a lot more often in the songs than John Lennon did. And that's something actually that came right out of the model, that we actually saw that songs where John Lennon was making transitions between diatonic scale notes tended to be much more frequent than songs that Paul McCartney was using the same kind of moves. So that's just one example.
So I read that some of the tools you use are the same or similar to the tools used in spam filters. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, so what we do is we end up basically taking we're using kind of the same kind of text analysis sorts of techniques that are used like in spam filters, where you might end up trying to find in spam filters, you're usually seeking for certain frequencies of certain kinds of words that might be indicative of spam. Like, you might see a word like, sale or I don't know, but buy, you might see phrases "buy now" or maybe some other salacious kinds of phrases. So you would see emails that actually have large occurrences of those kinds of words would be indicative of spam. In our setting, what we do is we look for occurrences, and without knowing in advance what the frequency is going to be, but we look for occurrences of particular musical motifs and count them. So that count over a single song is essentially a piece of information that reflects how frequently that particular motif is occurring. And we know for 70 of the songs that we were analyzing who actually wrote the song. So there's 70 songs and song fragments between 1962 and 1966 that are Lennon-McCartney songs where there's no dispute who wrote them. So we can basically train our model based on these 70 songs and examine the frequencies of occurrences of these various words. And the words are really things like the actual notes or individual chords or chord transitions or note transitions and melodies, or longer sequences of notes called contours that basically give the shape of the melody. And using all of those as individual words, we can essentially relate whether a song was written by John Lennon or Paul McCartney to those frequencies, and then pick up whether a song was likely to have been written by John or Paul.
And you're talking about the bags of words model, I believe it's called, right?
Right.
In this case, words doesn't necessarily mean actual words. It means these kind of like motifs or phrases or whatever.
Right. So the term bags of words, I think, came out of a more of a machine learning context. So I'm technically a statistician, and that's a term that is not very commonly used, or hasn't been traditionally commonly used.
Got it.
But bags of words essentially says, give me some text and then identify a whole bunch of words that I want to count the frequency of. And the counts attached to each of those words is the bag of words. It's the bag of words that are a collection of those words and their frequencies.
So you're talking, kind of touching on it a little bit, but what do you think of the kind of the power, the abilities and the growing abilities of neural networks in analysis like this? I mean, I'm pretty sure you weren't directly employing neural networks for your analysis, or maybe you were, but are you excited about kind of what the doors that opens for this type of analysis?
Right. So you're correct that we weren't using neural nets, but for this kind of a problem, what we were doing was we were using a fully Bayesian analysis. So it's a Bayesian analysis of multinomial outcomes, essentially. There's a little more, actually quite a bit more detail than that, but sure, overall, that's what we were using. But with neural nets, in specific, recursive neural nets are quite impressive at making sense out of language, like basically a sequence of words. And I don't know how much has actually been done. There's a little bit that's been done, but not a lot, on being able to parse through sets of music using recursive neural nets, because they're very good at like picking up repeated structures, which songs of course have, and being able to extract information that's relevant for predicting certain outcomes. In this case, an outcome would be the author of the song. So I think in general, neural nets and deep learning is pretty spectacular at what it can do. There's a certain statistical underpinning that's not really completely understood, and there's a very active area of statistical research trying to make sense out of why deep networks work, and that's something that really is going to be tying together the worlds of statistical research and neural nets.
Oh, I'm sure. So we got to wrap this up and move on. But sure. I just realized at this point we haven't even said the outcome of this study. People are like, seriously, we're 15 minutes into this interview. We still don't know who wrote the dang song. Is that an ending you wish to spoil right now? What did you find?
I'm sure. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to mention it. So our model predicts that there's a 98.2% chance that John Lennon wrote the music for In My Life. And just to put a little bit more context, I'll mention two quick things. One is that John Lennon was known to have written the lyrics for the song. There's no dispute about that. The question is who wrote the music. And our model basically says that John Lennon very, very likely wrote it. So that being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that John really had a very good chance of writing it. It's entirely possible, for example, that Paul might have been purposely emulating John's style when he wrote it. It's just basically saying that the musical features of the song In My Life are much more consistent with John Lennon's style of writing than it is for Paul. That's basically the conclusion that we get from our model.
Well, it's fascinating. I loved this story when I first saw it, and I'm super thrilled that we could get you on, Mark, to talk about it. I love that you've taken the time to pick this apart. It makes the Beatles nerd in me so happy. So, Mark Glickman, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay,
all right. Up next, your routers might not be so secure. We'll talk about that. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Slide Belts, high quality, comfortable ratchet belts that are super easy to adjust. Now, I've been spending a good amount of time wearing my Slide Belt. I've definitely come to realize that the ratchet's where it's at, but you might not have ever considered a ratchet on a belt or why it's even better than a traditional belt. Like, it's just never been a consideration, until Slide Belts come along. That's the way it was for me. Let's face it. Usually you just throw on those jeans, you loop the belt, you find the right hole on the belt, and you settle for it being just close enough. Well, Slide Belts don't have holes like your old belt. Instead, they use a patented ratchet design. I got to get one here. I'm not going to take the one that I'm wearing off. And they're swappable, which is kind of a nice feature of the Slide Belt. So you can cut it, you can size it to fit, you just snap it off so that it fits within the realm of your waist. You slide this into the thing and you actually snap this down so it'll hold it into place. That allows you to swap out all the belts. And then, let's see if I can loop this around here. This goes through, the belt comes through the other side, pops through there, and when you pull it, you get the kind of ratchet into place. And what that does is that allows your belt to fit you perfectly. Instead of, opting for the nearest hole on the belt and it's good enough. Instead, you've got 32 adjustment options for an incredibly comfortable fit. It's super precise. You can easily remove the buckle. You can mix and match with other straps. Like I said, ultimate customization and versatility. Do it on the fly. The system's super easy, so you can keep things fresh and swap straps and buckles out as your inner stylist guides you. Slide Belt offers a wide selection of straps from full grain and top grain leathers to high quality canvas and animal friendly vegan. Slide belts can be worn casually around the house and at the office or out for a date night. It's a great travel belt, or in the case of this, it's a great survival belt. Because you can even have all of these ways, like there's a flint on here that'll start a fire, a little blade on here if you need it. This is like the Uber survival belt from Slide Belts. All sorts of things, also like making it easier when you're going through security. If you're still not convinced, Slide Belts offers a 1-year warranty, free exchanges, and no hassle returns. If you're ready for a better belt, go to slidebelts.com/twit TWIT and use code TWIT at checkout to receive 20% off your order. That's slidebelts.com/TWIT. And don't forget to use code TWIT for 20% off your order. And we thank Slide Belts for their support.
The news from DEF CON and Black Hat keeps trickling in, and very little of it is good news. Joining us to talk about the persistent problems with Russian malware on our home and office routers is Patrick Tucker from Defense One. Welcome back to the show, Patrick.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So back in May, the FBI told us that the Russians were attacking our routers, but if we wanted them out of there, all we had to do was turn them off and turn them back on. Now, you attended a talk at DEF CON by Rob Joyce, a senior advisor to the director of the National Security Agency and the former White House cybersecurity coordinator, and he said that is not enough. So what can you tell us about this?
Right. So everyone remembers this big incident in May. It was kind of a weird thing for the FBI to tell you to restart your router, right? But the thing is that act of restarting, all it did was freeze a process that had begun. It doesn't actually remove the fundamental problem. So the way that this malware from the GRU, by the way, from basically Russia's military intelligence arm, the way that it works is that it works in three phases. The first phase, it gets into your router and it sort of establishes links there to other outside internet connections that it's going to make contact with, and it also begins to kind of like burrow into the reboot persistent memory. The next phase is where it becomes a big problem, and this is where it can exfiltrate traffic data from your router, and that's anything that you're doing with your router that's connected to your computer and the internet, which is all of your surfing and a ton of other stuff, incredibly sensitive and personal things, or potentially use it as part of a larger botnet attack. It's sort of up to, at that point, the GRU. The notice in May to turn off your router kind of halted that at phase one, where really the malware is just sort of settling in before it could get to phase 2 or 3. And everyone forgets about it because, we have things to do and we've restarted our routers and now off we go to use the internet the way we think that we're supposed to. And Joyce brings up this big problem in this talk. I put a lot of credibility in him, not just because he was White House cybersecurity coordinator, but before that, his job was head of the NSA's tailored access operations. He's kind of, in many ways, the government's most important offensive information security expert. So it's kind of like the U.S. government and NSA's most important hacker as head of that unit within the NSA. And he points out that, just by stopping this malware from activating in phase 2 and phase 3, where it's doing all of its dirty work, doesn't mean that it's actually removed. At all. In fact, it's still there, and in what the word he described to me is in an uncontrolled state. But the reason we didn't talk about it or talk about it anymore is because the FBI can't go ahead and remove that from your home router. The original report on it from Talos and Cisco, they list the vendors that are affected by this problem, but actually getting it off, you bought this router, and no one wants to deal with this problem, but it's kind of up to you to do that. So Joyce, in this comment, really wanted to emphasize to everybody, hey, vendors, the cybersecurity community, and everybody has to work together to give basically folks that bought this thing a way to get this stuff off, because as he points out, it's not like the Russian military forgot all of the IP addresses where this stuff has already been installed in that initial state. So it really speaks to, I think, this huge problem, which is that, we hear about cyber vulnerabilities and things like this, and after the moment of reportage, we all kind of move on, kind of waiting for something bad to happen. And if it does happen, then we have congressional investigations and Mueller campaigns and et cetera. And if it doesn't happen in a really conspicuous way, we'd sort of continue on that marching on. But once you take home a device like this and it's been compromised, you can obey instructions as they come to you from the government, but that doesn't mean that you've actually fixed the fundamental problem.
So maybe the better advice would have been to turn your router off and then never turn it back on.
Yeah, throw it away.
I don't know. That's something that I hope maybe some folks are actually doing with their routers right now. I mean, I don't want to foist new routers on everybody, but this is sort of an amazing thing. It's like 500,000 routers potentially maybe even a bit more. The original reporting from Cisco Talos leaves that kind of open. This is a very difficult thing to quantify, but to put that in the range of 500,000 kind of like bottom floor, that's terrifying. And 54 countries. So this is like a huge problem. The problem also is that we have to examine it in the context of all the other cybersecurity problems that we're talking about like all the time. And this was something else that emerged from DEF CON that I was also sort of like terrified about. You can go to these hacking villages, these awesome hacking villages, and the one that got the most press this year, very similar to last year, was like the election hacking village, right? Where we're taking a look at both voting machines and also at websites that are linked to state election boards and things like this. One 11-year-old kid was able to hack into a virtualized sort of mirror version of a Florida election site very quickly and change the virtualized simulated results. I think it was like 30 minutes. I sat with a kid, I think he was like 18. We busted into a Diebold voting machine. He like located the core processor. It's an Intel Circuit 2001. It's got to be running like, Windows 9.5, maybe like 2000. And just go ahead and look up all the potential vulnerabilities and exploits that you can perpetrate on that, and off you go. I also talked with Jeanette Manfra, who is the Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security for cyber stuff and election stuff. And she makes the point that any one of these little sort of pyrotechnic displays by themselves isn't like a huge deal. And you can't really perpetrate them at a scale to shift an entire national election in a way that where you won't get caught. But the potential for mayhem is very real. There's a lot of state election boards. They're very various. They have all sorts of different resource levels, all sorts of different attention levels. And it's a big deal to try and herd them all towards the best possible cybersecurity practices for all of their stuff, to really get them all on page with the best things that they can do to really secure their elections. And I walked away very sort of like reassured that there were folks in our government that are A, kind of like on top of it, and B, care enough about this to go and stick themselves in like a Las Vegas hacker conference and really talk about it. But that doesn't mean that like this is an easy thing that you can solve all at once just with a few speeches. It takes a lot of work and a lot of buy-in from a lot of people. And so it's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and I think, kind of calling back to what you were talking about earlier, that's the challenge, right? Not only paying attention to it, but maintaining that attention to it. I feel like right now, in so many ways right now, we're being bombarded with stuff day after day, be it security, be it politics, whatever, that at a certain point, in order to deal with that, the onslaught of information, we hear something, we think we've dealt with it, we power cycle our router, and then we move on because we simply don't have it in us to continue obsessing over this minute by minute. And that seems like a much bigger issue here. People, I mean, is that how do you attempt to even solve that problem and kind of snap people back to reality and say this is worth like longer spans of attention?
Well, I think that the thing that people pay attention to is when a bunch of data that was exfiltrated from a political party that they know about all of a sudden leads to a massive news story that everyone has to pay attention to, and that we're still having like conversations and investigations about years later. Like that's the only thing that really does it, is when all of a sudden that information, that data, like that vulnerability results in a big problem. Mm-hmm. People in Ukraine, I think they're kind of aware now of potential vulnerabilities in their infrastructure, because in 2015 and 2016, lights went off in the dead of winter in parts of Kiev. For a long period of time. It was the same group that actually put all this malware on all these routers. So that's an effect. We pay attention to the effect. The vague threat, unconnected to a possible consequence, so much harder to pay attention to. I don't have a solution for that because, we don't pay attention to vague threats. We pay attention to an absolute understanding of how something bad is going to affect us.
Or is already happening, yeah.
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 So if you don't recommend that we just get new routers, I mean, are there any recommendations? Obviously, like make sure that our router has all the security updates. Is there anything we can do?
I think we'll first go back and take a look at the original report from Cisco Talos, and that'll tell you whether or not you should actually be fretting about your router. And I think that they do actually have some guidelines, and maybe you should buy a new router. It sort of depends on how how worried you are really about this, and also whether or not you have one of the routers that's listed there. That's something to consider doing, is just going out and buying a new one, because I don't think that there's like a super easy fix, but there is a fix. More broadly, and this is something that I brought up with the government folks that I talked to, because they want to talk on this, but they can't. They never can. They just can't do it. We have a national vulnerabilities database, right? It's maintained by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And I mean, I don't care how you vote or who you are. It's a great example of like good government, like us paying tax dollars for something that actually helps everybody, like this huge database that lists all the potential problems that could have been found to date. 80 to 90% of like, the problems that are going to affect, Experian and your, credit data, Sony, all of these other things, that's in that database. There is no law that says that chief intelligence officers have to make sure that every system that's under their jurisdiction is up to date on all of those patches. There's also no money to help, for instance, hospitals to do that, to make sure that every old computer that they have is fully up to date, because some of them are going to need new operating systems, some of them are going to need new equipment. It's a big capital expense too. This is the sort of thing that government could have a big impact on, finding money to help institutions that need to patch and buy new equipment, and also maintain and through law some mandate that chief intelligence officers, chief information officers actually try. That's a policy issue. And the thing is, all the government folks that I talk to, they know that they can't make like policy recommendations when they talk to people, because policy is for Congress and folks that we elect. But they all know that that would be like a huge deal. Like that would make like a huge difference. All of this coverage would go somewhere else.
Maybe we need another branch of the military, the cybersecurity force. If I were president.
Now you're thinking, yeah.
Oh, man, don't get me started. Oh, you're going to give me a attack. I have to talk that one.
Patrick, thank you so much. Patrick Tucker is a technology editor at Defense One. It's always great to talk to you, and we look forward to talking to you soon. We'll keep hounding this, and I would elect you the head of the cybersecurity force.
Well, thank you. That's a terrible decision, but thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Patrick.
Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you soon. All right, you may think we're done talking about robots. You are wrong. Science Robotics published the results of a study where children were placed alone in a room with robots and asked to look at a screen to answer which 2 of 4 drawn lines on the screen were the same length. When asked this alone, the children, or the child that was sitting there at the time, was right in choosing the 2 similarly long lines 87% of the time. However, when robots were allowed to give their own guesses as well, children's accuracy score dropped to 75%. And of those wrong answers, 74% of those wrong answers matched the opinion of the robot peers that were sitting in the room with them. Adults, on the other hand, were not swayed in the same way as the children were. This points to the fact that children might actually be considerably influenced by the opinions of robots in certain situations. What does this kind of conformity point to? Perhaps an increased affinity, perhaps, with robots when compared to adults. Children are more willing to accept support from robots, which could have positive implications, maybe in the realm of learning as one example. But the conclusion of the study does point out that attention should be made to ensure a regulatory framework is in place to protect children's interactions with robots as well. Kind of thinking about what this could extend out to in the future if robots are that convincing to children. So tell me, Megan, is this a good or a bad thing? Because I honestly can't tell.
I think it is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral.
Oh, well, I'm thoroughly confused.
Okay,
it does not exist then.
So they had kids in the rooms with robots and they had adults in the rooms with robots. But what I would want to see is to have kids in the room with adults and then kids in the room with robots. Like, are kids more likely to listen to robots? Or are they more likely to listen to adults? Because if they're more likely to listen to robots, I am going to get one of those home robots. I'm going to bring it home to raise my kids.
Oh, you're gonna teach the robot on the side. All right, this is the way that I'm raising my kids.
Yes.
When I'm not around, you enforce these behaviors.
Right. Exactly.
That's smart.
Well, because this is I don't know. I mean, I read this and it's like, well, kids are more influenced.
Yeah.
They're more influential. So, I mean, I guess they were proving that they could also be influenced by robots in addition to adults. But I am really interested in if there was a study done about whether they would listen to a robot or listen to an adult.
Yeah.
Because I know that my kids listen to their iPads when they don't listen to me. So.
Well, it kind of to a certain degree might also speak to the fact that like we actually have experiences now in this world that we live in today, and children are growing up in this world. My 5-year-old daughter, prime example, where we talk to robots and where robots tell us things, and so assistant could be considered a robot. You go back in time 20 years ago and propose a Lenovo smart display with assistant on it, we would probably call that a robot to a certain degree, based on our perceptions then. Now it's a smart display or a smart assistant, but they're kind of doing the things that we thought robots would do at some point. Right. We're talking to them, we're conversing with them, and that might influence how we think or how children think growing up with that.
Exactly. I mean, so
it's interesting.
I've definitely been concerned with
the future.
With the idea. I seriously though have been concerned about just the robots you're talking about, like the smart assistants, because they presume that they have an answer to a question. Yeah. And so there are many answers to questions, and so. But I am interested because my kids didn't necessarily like grow up. It's only been 4 years, 2015, 3 years since we've had these devices in our house. But do your kids listen to them? I mean, do they treat them like they treat you? Because my kids sort of treat all of our smart devices with disdain. Even more than
it's kind of a thing that they can boss around successfully and not get yelled at as a result. The only smart thing in our home that our kids interact with is the Google Home. And I got to say, they're pretty respectful. Sometimes they say please. It's kind of crazy. And I didn't teach them to say please.
Yes, you did.
I wouldn't do that. Well, I certainly didn't tell them like, hey, this is Google Home. Her name is Assistant. And make sure and say please at the end of every query. I didn't tell my kids that. I probably should have. But sometimes they do. So I'm actually pleasantly impressed about how they don't order it around or demand it. I mean, heck, they take the Google Home outside and give it a dance show while it's playing music. Oh. So they're giving back to the Google Home. Oh. They're performing for the Google Home and entertaining the Google Home. That's really nice of them to do.
I mean, my kids aren't rude to the devices. They just certainly feel like they're lesser part. Like it goes like the devices, the dogs, me, their siblings, their dad. that's
I need that on a graph. I need to visualize that a little bit. All right. Well, maybe you have opinions on this. TNW@twit.tv. Let us know, and we'll throw it in the email section. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific, 5:30 p.m. Eastern at twit.tv/live.
And subscribe to our show. Ask your assistants. Tell your assistants, but say please. Subscribe to it. You can find all the ways. You can just ask your assistant to play it whenever you want, but we want you to subscribe so you get it first. twit.tv/TNW. And if you want to tweet at me about how your family treats your smart assistants, I'm at Megan Maroney and always waiting to hear from you.
Yes, I want to hear that too. I think this is a good discussion. I want to hear from you guys on it. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to everyone who helps out. Burke, Josh, Jammer B was in here earlier. Colleen helps out as well. Thank you all for helping out. And thanks to you for checking out the show each and every week. We'll see you all next Thursday on another episode of Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.